Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us on our live today. So today we're going to be discussing fashion sustainability. I'm Morgana Angeli, one of the founders of Reset Revolution. And just a little recap on Reset Revolution. Reset Revolution is an international platform that aims to connect people from around the world to talk about topics of social injustice, as well as just have different perspectives and hear different perspectives on issues from around the world. So joining us today is Katrina Forberg, and she's going to be discussing fashion sustainability with personal connections, as well as some insights that she's been studying. So Katrina, if you'd like to join us. 1 second. Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Katrina. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, my name is Katrina. I'm a student here in Brussels. I'm very interested about environmental issues, and also I've tied it to my passions and hobbies in like arts and fashion and design. So that's what I'm here to talk about today, sustainability in the fashion industry.
Could you please begin by explaining what fashion sustainability is?
Now, that's actually really difficult to define because sustainability is such a broad term. Overall, like most people associate sustainability with ensuring well-being for the future generations and future interests, as well as without compromising current and present interests and priorities. So in terms of fashion, I would say that means making fashion a better type of better industry for the workers involved, for the environment, and for us as consumers.
Thank you. So you just described kind of what fashion sustainability is, and to get on the other side of it, what are the social and environmental impacts of unsustainable fashion? So fashion unsustainability.
So unsustainability in fashion can be seen in workers' conditions, specifically in India and Bangladesh, in low economically developed countries. Now their working conditions, hours, wages are really the wages are really low. The conditions are not necessarily safe, and we've seen that in the past in disasters. Produce clothes are women, and they're also mothers, so they don't have time to take care of their children, and usually they take their children to work. And that's why in the Rana Plaza disaster there were also children that died. Economic terms, that's hard to evaluate because for the companies that make these clothes, they profit immensely. However, it's really the economically, the countries that produce these clothes suffer, and the workers themselves, of course.
And in regards to the environment, what are the impacts that this industry has on the environment, as well as environmental sustainability?
Right. For the environment, so the process of producing clothes involves so many different steps. It requires dyeing, it requires processing, and also growing the actual materials, the raw resources. So not only do we need to use a lot of pesticides and water to grow crops like cotton, but we also, for example, dye jeans and colorful fabrics, and these are very strong chemicals that don't necessarily get processed very well, and with low environmental regulations in certain countries, that causes great impacts for the environment and for animals in nearby in ecosystems.
Thank you very much. So these are just like the outlinings of what the most important ramifications of unsustainable fashion are. So on this regard, a lot of people think that changing consumer behavior does not make a lot of change, and so that the claim you can't shop your way to equality. What do you think about this claim?
I agree with it to some extent that consumers must become more aware of these problems and ask for the companies to take responsibility for their practices, because we have no power to regulate that really. But then again, that also comes from personal change, whether we recognize these issues that are present. But of course, like, I'm not trying to say this as I'm not trying to preach, and I'm trying to stay open-minded. I'm not here to tell people what's right or wrong, but there are two aspects of it, and demanding for change is necessary.
Do you know of any examples where customer boycott has actually helped change the way that businesses act, especially in recent days?
Well, I've done a research in the past about and I keep mentioning this Rana Plaza disaster. I mean, that was really shocking for the world, and there were so many well-known brands in this factory building. This was highly publicized. Of course, there are still working conditions are still not great, but like, companies like H&M have improved their practices. And also, I know that Sri Lanka is one of the best countries for workers' working conditions in the garment industry in Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much. And I think the H&M example is something that's really interesting, since I think a lot of people, especially in our age group, tend to shop there. And I think that it has become very visual, the boycott, and people refuse to even look at H&M clothes based on the fact that they are both socially and economically and environmentally unsustainable. So I think that I agree with what you were saying about how consumer activism can actually change the way our world works. So in regards to this, how have you made changes in your personal life and your habits to perhaps be more sustainable?
Well, recently I've kind of changed, my relationship to clothes has changed over the years. So I think now there's like two aspects of it. There's the style, like the aesthetics, which is really what prevents people talking about this issue and label it as like shallow or materialistic. Yes, of course, there's that aspect, but I'm also looking at my impacts on this. So how, like, if I wear clothes every day, it's something that I use every day, I want to make sure that I limit its impacts, and that it will be with me for a long time. I mean, I would use the example of boots. Like, I'm more prone to making long-term investments, even though they're really maybe more expensive, like my Doc Martens, I love them a lot. But I know that if I take care of them, they're going to stay with me, and at the same time, it will limit my impact on the environment.
In terms of shopping, have you changed stores where you buy clothes, or how often you buy clothes, or stuff like that? Have you made a change in that?
So I've changed. So I'm more often I go to vintage stores and thrift stores, but I also have changed the frequency that I buy clothes. Like, I don't buy them as often as I used to, and also, like, looking out for trends, because that is kind of what reels some people in sometimes. And I agree, trends are really fun, but I try to keep in mind the long term, the big picture is whether I'm going to use this again.
It's really interesting how you bring up trends, and before that you were bringing up vintage shopping or thrifting. So what do you think could be the problems of thrifting now that it has become more of a trend, especially in relation to social conditions and how it could have negative ramifications within society?
Yeah, again, like buying vintage clothes has also become kind of a fad in recent days that um, they've picked up on this, and it's kind of become, I don't know, gentrified, that people tend to find nice vintage clothes, or well, there's a difference between the label of thrifting and vintage. Vintage is like curated to a specific time period, and then there's thrifted, which is just overall secondhand clothes. But the problem tends to arise that in thrift stores, people pick out certain clothes and then resell them at a higher price. And there's not necessarily a problem with that, but some people cannot afford to buy good quality, nice clothes from normal stores. And so it's just asking ourselves to reevaluate, do we really need to buy these jeans for $1 when somebody else might need it more?
Yeah, I
So
completely agree. And especially during the winter time, I think that though thrifting has so many pros for the environment with the reduced use of water to produce like clothes, and it's less labor intensive, I think that here in Brussels, for example, it's a perfect example. It's cold, it gets really cold in winter, and when people fall into this trend of buying thrifted jackets and thrifted jeans, then there's people who need those jeans and jackets to not die of hypothermia. Um, and there's just none that they can like buy, or there aren't enough in their size. And it's just all these considerations, and it's really hard to like be perfect. So that's not what this
yeah,
interview is about. It's more like these are all the options and then
yeah,
find a moderate balance between them all, you know?
yeah. It's what
Um,
works for each person, what feels right to you. There's I can't give an answer. It's just about how I feel and how everybody else feels.
so, what do you think are some things that we can tell our viewers, some tips to tackle unsustainable fashion and its ramifications?
I think overall, maybe just maybe reflect a little bit on your values. Like, I'm not trying to criticize anyone, because that's how quickly like discussions like these get shut down. Um, that it's hypocritical. I'm by no means perfect. Um, but I do recognize, so for example, I try to shop less fast fashion brands like Zara and H&M. But I wouldn't stop anyone from purchasing from them, because I understand that they're also affordable clothes, and they're really nice clothes too. So there's that. But maybe limit your frequency. Um, Also, I have also gotten more curious about where my clothes are produced, how they're produced, and I know that people reach out and do some research or email the companies. So if that interests you,
Yes, they.
sorry.
It's
Um,
okay.
yeah. And
Okay.
also, altering your clothes is also really useful. Yeah.
There's some questions that came from the chat. I'm going to start with one that was asked at the very beginning. And it was, in your experience, can you recommend any sustainable brands that you know of?
That's really tough. I think that uh, mostly try maybe to shop locally, and consume maybe handmade things. But overall, a sustainable brand, or brands that try to look after their sustainability, are COS. But I know that they're a subsidiary of H&M, so there's also that. Um, it's I just try mostly to buy secondhand clothes. So it's really tough for me to recommend, but that's a good starting point, I would say.
Thank you very much. Another question, which again is in relation to the shopping aspects, and it's how can we know if a brand is unsustainable without, like the whole media boycott on H&M and without having to wait for it to be a trend to boycott a store? How can we, as consumers, actively understand if a brand is not being sustainable?
Well, we would firstly look at their maybe their business model. So I would say that overall, I think maybe the linear business model is kind of problematic. If you see that maybe a brand hasn't mentioned anything about recycling or their practices in developing the fabrics, maybe that's a good starting point. As well, I know that there are also problems in overall the brands. It's not just fast fashion brands. Overall, the whole business model of fashion is fast because there's like 24 seasons, even though it's 1 year, and they try to put out as many things as possible. So not only brands like H&M and Zara and Urban Outfitters are guilty of doing this, but also really high-end luxury brands. So it's just do your research. It's
I think that research is a great place to start, and just look if the company is being transparent about their actions. If they're being transparent, then usually they're going to be the sustainable ones, and if they're kind of hiding everything, you can kind of get a hint.
Remembered one brand that's because somebody mentioned what are good sustainable brands. I think Patagonia is a good one. They also do a lot of research into their design strategies and things like that and minimizing their impact. So that's a good brand too. Just forgot about it.
Thank you. Another question that was asked is, why is it so important, especially now, to tackle this topic, and why is it so important for this type of audience, so teenagers, and to hear about these problems?
That's a very big question. So overall, I would say we are all in the age of dealing with climate change. So I think we're all trying to minimize the impacts of that in our daily lives. But also just overall making the world a better place, because the fashion industry is not a kind place to humans nor the environment. So I think that's why it's important. And why it's important for maybe our audience, our generation, is because we're maybe more prone to experiment with things. We're still trying to find our style and our self-expression, and that's really the reason why I connected with fashion and this issue, especially with my thrifting experience. It didn't start out by being sustainable. It was obviously trying to get the coolest things for the lowest price, but now that's maybe less the case.
Thank you. So how do you think that the media glorifies unsustainable consumerism, or vice versa?
Unsustainable or sustainable?
Unsustainable consumerism.
The media. So I mean, influencers, I guess, can be quite responsible for creating trends or promoting certain trends. I remember a few years ago, last year or the year before, there was this £1 bikini from, I think it was Misguided, I'm not sure. And of course, affordability is a big aspect, and I totally understand that. And I'm not, people get caught up in like these like debates and like lecturing others, because it can be quite elitist to ask people not to shop at places where the prices are cheaper. That's not the whole point. It's just is it really worth it? And how much are these workers getting paid for, you know, 1 pound? I think that's a bit concerning.
I agree. So how do you think, in the other way, how do you think that the media glorifies sustainable consumerism?
Sustainable consumerism, I would say, I think in the media that's maybe not seen as frequently, to be honest, but I think I've seen more emergence of unrelated to fashion really, but small things, so like our daily habits, like bamboo toothbrushes and reusable like cotton towels and things like that. Oh, and also straws. That was a big thing. I think I've seen so few plastic straws. I mean, it seems like a very little thing, and I agree there could be a lot more done, but I think that's a big step.
What do you think is the problem with that being considered a major step, though? Do you think that in some way companies and other enterprises are scapegoating on small acts, such as the straws, as you mentioned, or like little changes to divert from the actual problem of unsustainable business?
Right. Yeah, that can be also related to greenwashing, that some companies make their practices seem to be more environmentally friendly than they actually are. So that conceals their true conditions. So transparency is a big issue still. So I see the problem with that as well. Obviously, now that we've changed from not using plastic straws, we have metal straws. And now what are we going to do with all of these metal straws? It's a complicated issue.
It's a really complicated thing to navigate, but I think you set out some really interesting points and a lot of ways which our viewers as well as other people around the world can tackle the problem of unsustainable fashion. So does anyone else have questions that they would like to be addressed? I think in the coming days we'll try to publish maybe a list of sustainable stores where you could shop at. Katrina and I will put that up together. And yeah. Anyone?
I mean, I'm just, yeah, overall I'm really passionate about this topic. I used to be maybe a bit more certain about how to be environmentally sustainable, but now the answer is a bit less clear, and it's about what my values are. So it also is just connecting back to like what I believe personally. Like if I connect with feminism, I would think that this aspect of my life should also reflect that. So if I care about women's rights, I would also care about working women's rights. So it's just it's a really complex web.
Thank you very much. Katoha had a question, but I can't seem to find it. So I think, oh, here it is. How did you change your lifestyle outside of sustainable fashion to promote sustainability?
Can you repeat the question?
How did you change your lifestyle outside of sustainable fashion to promote sustainability?
Well, I've tried to, outside of fashion, I've tried to change things in my daily life, like use reusable bags when I go to the store. Specifically also when I'm buying vegetables, I notice that there's so much packaging. So I'm trying to limit that. I am trying also to, I'm also trying to, for example, use in my personal routine, for example, like for example, if I'm using razors, I mean it's a thing that everybody uses. I'm not ashamed to talk about it. But I think that's also a key factor, especially linking to the environment, because not only is there so much plastic, but there's also it's a danger to animals. So I would say that yeah.
One last question I think we got here is, do you think that sustainability is becoming a trend that people don't actually believe in and just follow the trend? And what do you think are the effects of this?
A little bit. Yeah, I think it is becoming a trend a little bit, and I think it comes from the fact that, as I mentioned, hypocrisy. Like, you shouldn't be afraid of that. You should just talk about things. Like, I make mistakes too. As I said, my first thrifting experience was like kind of also clouded by stigmatism of thrifting, like, oh, secondhand clothes and stuff. But I overcame that. Like, I love it. But that's the issue there, that people are not willing to talk about it or shut out certain groups because, oh, they shop at Zara, so I'm not going to talk to you because you are unsustainable, when it's really a lot more tangled.
Thank you very much for joining us today and for highlighting all these really important points. I hope that people will take these further and maybe do some research, get more informed about their own life and the way they make decisions and shop. Um, but yeah, thank you very much.